Hello and welcome to a brand new mindmastery video. Today I'm going to talk about the magician archetype and what can we do in order to use its balance form on the path of transformation or finding new opportunities and learning more about ourselves and the world in general. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an overview of this archetype. Then I'm going to go through negative traits, so negative manifestations of the magician archetype. And lastly, I'm going to try to provide some tips on how we can use this balance form. So what we can do in order to use its positive manifestation in our life. So the magician archetype is associated with kind of intuitive knowledge, with improvising with our experience, adapting to different circumstances without truly knowing how. There's also this mysterious aura about the magician archetype because the magician goes and do things whilst other people don't fully understand how they do it, how he or she does it. So the magician essentially, it draws on this subconscious or unconscious field of, intuitions, insight, different skills. So they make things happen without knowing how. So in the face of difficulties, in the face of challenges, they will still find a way to create something, to push forward, to manifest what they want to manifest. And in my opinion, I think the magician archetype is actually composed of several different archetypes, at least 3 of them. The first one would be obviously the sage. So someone who pursues knowledge, someone who uses their intellect to learn more about themselves or the world or other people. So sage is someone who is on this quest of improving their intellect, gathering knowledge, learning, right? But the difference here is that the sage doesn't always use the intuition. The sage is always focused on this cognitive realm, intellectual realm, whereas the magician utilizes the intuition, utilizes this mysterious and alchemical forces to make things happen, to gather knowledge in the first place. Another archetype associated with a magician, or rather the archetype that creates this whole archetype as we see as a magician, would be the trickster or the fool, right? So someone who bends the rules, someone who tricks others at times, tricks their perception, so creates something out of nothing in a sense. So again, similar to the magician, but the trickster doesn't have any constructive goal in mind other than to disrupt the status quo, to go against the rule, to go against the rules, to play with perceptions, right? So we can see its elements actually in the magician archetype, but it's not as pronounced. But at the same time, the magician archetype wouldn't be the same without the trickster archetype. So there is this element of going with chaos, playing with bending rules, bending perceptions, changing people's perceptions, creating these illusions in order to create something, to make a point, right? And the last archetype, I think that is strongly associated with the magician, is that of a healer. So a healer is all about using one's experience and knowledge to heal others, obviously. And I think that the right or the healthy form of the magician will use these skills of bending this perceptual field, of bending the reality in a sense, to help other people, to heal them. So again, the magician, in my opinion, is composed of at least these 3 archetypes that contribute to different powers in a sense, or different skills that the magician uses in order to, play with magic of this world, play with magic of the reality, create different things with the intuition. And lastly, I think that magician is highly transformational archetype because it's kind of like going with the flow in a sense, going with the unconscious, going with natural laws, learning as we go along. So using our pre-existing knowledge and experience to go on this path of transformation. So without having any goal in mind, we just keep going with this intuitive insight that we might be having to create something, to play with reality, to use the reality and different laws and different elements to our advantage in a sense. Well, we can create something in a sense out of thin air, right? So going against challenges, going against difficulties. And the reason why this archetype is so mysterious is because, like I've mentioned before, nobody knows how the magician works, right? They use these pre-existing skills and create things out of thin air without truly knowing how. So even the magician himself or herself doesn't fully know how it all works, because it's all based on this interaction with the unconscious, interaction with intuition itself. But obviously there's also a negative side, and it's very easy to kind of get lost in all this illusions, right? Because essentially magician has the skill to create illusions around themselves, within themselves. So it's not only about deluding other people in terms of the identity or skills, but also deluding themselves. So it's very easy to lose self in that state. It's very easy to kind of struggle to be authentic, struggle to know who we truly are and what really matters in life. So I think there's this potential for the magician itself, if we get embedded in this archetype too far, to lose ourselves, to, either rely too much on the unconscious or intuition or natural forces without fully taking responsibility for our own behavior, for our own skills to make things happen in our life. So we might put too much responsibility onto external forces, onto forces that we cannot control or understand, at the expense of our own confidence or responsibility or even identity. And again, this deception relates to this magician's power to create different realities out of thin air, in a sense, create illusions, take different perspectives, take different positions. So essentially, it's like a magician manipulating different roles, different persons within themselves in order to explore different experiences, in a sense, gather different knowledge from different perspectives. But in a negative form, it creates self-deception, because what is our true self in the end, right? If we just keep shifting these positions and perspectives and selves, then it's very difficult to maintain this stable sense of self. But also it obviously creates this deception towards other people, because then we cannot be authentic, we cannot relate to others because there is nobody really to relate to, because we have so many different selves to use. And also, if there is this element of a negative trickster, we might misuse this ability to kind of create an illusion around ourselves, so that, all right, nobody knows me and I'm going to maintain it that way because I can, right? Because I have this ability to create different roles and assume different positions. And I think patterns like this, where we don't take enough responsibility for what we can and what we cannot do, and creating all these illusions and not sticking to our true self, can lead one to this place of ego inflation, where the magician assumes that they have more control in their life than they truly do. So what happens in that case is obviously that magician is taking the responsibility for things that happen by chance, things that happen by accident, things that happen by this interaction with the unconscious mechanism. The ego inflation in that case is about, attributing the causes of all these happenings in one's life to oneself. So obviously this is kind of delusional in a sense, because then it can lead to grandiosity, fantasies of power or success. So feeling like we are someone special in a sense, because we have all the skills, which are not really ours at the end, but we don't realize that because our ego is inflated. And we then end up in the state of being completely removed from the reality and ourselves and other people. So I think it's a huge risk for this archetype of the magician. And also in regards to avoidance of responsibility and ego inflation, there might be this kind of drive to give other false information in a sense. So pretending that we are stupid, pretending that we are unaware of something, pretending that we don't know, even if in reality we do. So again, this is this misuse of magician's power, combined with the trickster itself, and where we can mess around with our own perception and other people's perception, and create a persona that other people can see, but that persona doesn't really exist, because it's all play of different positions and perspectives and roles that we can create just by feeding other people false information. So again, as I've mentioned before, that can create grandiosity and isolate us further from other people. In a case where this ego inflation doesn't really happen, there's also a risk of setting too high expectations for ourselves and for other people. So again, that leads to criticism, being overly critical of other people. And very often, even if we are capable of meeting these expectations, because we are a magician, this again creates the split, this huge gap between ourselves and other people, because we set the same expectations as we set for ourselves towards other people, and so we become highly critical of them, of them not having the same abilities, of not having the same skills, or not having the same knowledge as we are having. So again, that's going to create isolation, loneliness, and not being able to relate to others. So all these elements that I've just mentioned relate to this imbalance and negative form of the magician archetype, which are caused by either going too much into magician archetype, so either assuming completely the role and identifying with the magician itself, or not having this magician energy enough, in a sense, where that archetype kind of pushes through our unconscious and forces us to do something in regards to its pattern. So based on all that, we can develop a list of simple things that we can do in our life in order to use the balanced form and healthy form of this archetype. So whenever we recognize that we are going into a magician, it's very beneficial, in my opinion, to keep these things in mind in order to make sure that we don't go into this extreme of identifying with the magician archetype. So first of all, as I've mentioned before, I think it's very important to use the balanced form of the sage, the trickster, and the healer archetype. So not going into extremes, but kind of find this middle path between chaos and order, focusing on others and focusing on yourself, right? Intuition and intellect, pursuing knowledge and pursuing awareness, for example. So any extreme that you can find, basically, any opposite poles that you can learn about, try to find a middle way so that you don't go into extremes. And obviously, during this process of finding a balance, we need to be able to be authentic, to be true to ourselves. And this can be done by setting principles and priorities in our life. So as a magician, you might feel like you have this special talents, special skills. So in order to kind of shield yourself from misusing these skills, when you have a list of priorities, when you know what to focus in life, when you know what is the most important thing, you're going to direct your skills and powers into the specific areas. So that will allow you to, use your power properly instead of, being a fool and messing around with things that can, obviously waste your time and waste your energy and waste people's time and energy. And in that whole process, I think it's very important to not identify so much with what you're doing and with the results of your actions. So, don't take yourself too seriously, because the moment you start taking yourself seriously, when the magician archetype is too active, again, that might lead to this ego inflation, and where you can start attributing the causes of everything in your life to yourself, to your ego. So, suddenly I've created everything in my life. No, you didn't. So that's why it's important to, use a little bit of humor at times. Don't take yourself too seriously. And maybe pay attention to what you can really control in your life, what you can really make happen, right? And leave the rest to this unconscious and mysterious area of intuition and natural laws. By not taking yourself too seriously, that will allow you to accept your own vulnerability and the vulnerabilities of other people. So that way you can, develop some tact, sensitivity, being humble, and humility. So all these traits will allow you to kind of ground yourself to the level of where the existence is actually happening. And paradoxically, the more grounded you are, the more this mysterious and kind of, in a sense, spiritual things, you will be able to experience, because that's where the existence happens. It happens in front of you. It happens in relationships with other people. It happens when you are breathing. It happens when you're using your senses in this kind of limited world, in a sense. But by grounding yourself, you will be able to, it will be way easier to relate to other people. It will be way easier to feel like you're belonging, that you're a part of humanity as a whole, because essentially you are. But again, there is this potential for the magician archetype to completely space out into this unconscious and mysterious realm, which can completely remove you from the reality itself. So that has been my short take on the magician archetype. As usual, if you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to leave them just below the video. And if you're interested in working with me, you can now book your free 20 minutes coaching consultation. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.